Daniel Whitmore's world looked like the kind men envied and women admired. The white-painted house on Crestwood Lane glowed against the morning sun, its garden trimmed with military precision. Neighbors waved when he left for work, calling his name with the warmth reserved for someone who never faltered, never stumbled. His suits fit him like armor. His smile was a practiced shield. By day, he was the youngest partner at a respected financial firm, a man who signed contracts with a steady hand and celebrated victories with controlled charm. At home, he had Emily, his college sweetheart, the woman who seemed to complete the image of success. She hosted dinners, lit candles in the evening, and laughed softly when his colleagues admired their perfect marriage. But perfection always cracks in silence. Emily had grown quieter in recent months. She lingered at the window during mornings, staring at nothing as coffee cooled untouched in her hand. At dinner, she pushed food around her plate with the distant air of someone locked in her own thoughts. Daniel noticed, of course. He noticed everything. Yet when he asked, her answer was always the same. "I'm fine, just tired." He wanted to believe her. It was easier that way. Work demanded his attention. Clients needed reassurance, and appearances had to be kept polished. A distracted wife could be explained away, but a fractured marriage? That was unacceptable. One evening, as the sun bled into amber across the horizon, Daniel reached for her hand across the table. Emily's fingers flinched, retreating before he could hold them. The moment lasted less than a heartbeat, but it burned into him like a brand. He forced a smile, masking his unease. Stress, he told himself. She's only stressed. The neighbors still praised them, unaware of the tension woven into the silence of their home. Behind closed doors, the laughter had faded. Conversations grew shorter, eyes less willing to meet. And yet, when they stepped outside, they performed their roles flawlessly. The golden couple with everything anyone could want. For Daniel, the illusion was everything. But illusions, no matter how carefully maintained, have a way of collapsing, and Emily's distance was only the beginning. Emily's distance had become a shadow in their home. But Daniel clung to routine, as if order could ward off chaos. That Friday evening, the illusion slipped. She had promised to be home by 8 after meeting a friend for dinner. By 9, Daniel sat alone at the kitchen table, his tie loosened, the untouched meal congealing in front of him. He checked the clock, then his phone. No message, no call? Emily was punctual, sometimes obsessively so. He dialed her number, rang once, twice, until her voicemail's calm voice filled the line. "This is Emily, leave a message." "Emily, it's me." "Call when you're on your way," Daniel said, keeping his voice level. He hung up quickly, not wanting to hear the tremor that threatened to slip through. By 10, irritation pressed against his composure. He poured himself a drink, scrolling through unanswered texts. At 11, irritation curdled into unease. He imagined her car stalled on some dark road, or her phone dead, leaving her stranded. Midnight came like a sentence. He tried again, over and over. His calls swallowed by silence. The house grew cavernous in her absence. Every creak of wood, every hum of the refrigerator sounded louder, as though mocking him. Daniel paced the living room, phone clutched like a lifeline. He called her friend, no answer. He checked her social media, nothing new. By 1, his chest tightened with something heavier than worry. At 2 in the morning, he left the lights blazing and sat by the window, waiting for headlights to sweep across the driveway. They never came. His messages grew frantic, the polished sentences unraveling into fragmented pleas. "Where are you? Call me. Please, Emily." When dawn began to pale the sky, Daniel could no longer cling to control. His hand shook as he dialed the police. The words tasted foreign on his tongue. "My wife didn't come home last night. I don't know where she is." The officer's calm questions blurred together. Details about her car, where she'd gone, what time she left. Daniel answered mechanically, his gaze fixed on the empty chair at the kitchen table, where her untouched plate still sat. For the first time, the immaculate house felt hostile. Perfection had gone silent, and within that silence, dread had found its home. Morning light had barely stretched across Crestwood Lane when the police called back. A car matching Emily's description had been found at the edge of Miller's Park, its headlights still faintly glowing. Battery drained. Daniel drove there in a haze, the world outside the windshield bending under the weight of dread. The park was cordoned off with tape, officers moving like shadows in the mist. His pulse thundered as he stumbled toward the scene, demanding answers. A uniformed officer blocked him, firm but gentle. "Sir, you'll need to wait." Daniel's chest heaved. Waiting was impossible. Then he saw it, her body on the damp ground near the tree line. Emily lay on her side, her hair tangled, her face pale but oddly peaceful. There were no bruises, no blood, no torn clothes. She looked as though she had simply lain down and let the night swallow her. "Emily." Daniel's voice cracked, raw with disbelief. He tried to surge forward, but officers restrained him. His cries tore through the morning quiet, echoing against the trees. Neighbors and bystanders who had gathered whispered among themselves. The perfect couple, undone. Paramedics confirmed what his heart already knew. Emily was gone. The detective in charge scribbled notes, his brow furrowed at the absence of struggle. No clear cause, no weapon, no wounds, an uncertain death. Words that left Daniel cold. He sank onto the grass, head in his hands, rocking slightly as if movement could hold back the enormity of loss. Yet even in his grief, he never lost composure entirely. His tears came sparingly, his sobs cut short. He spoke clearly to officers, recounting times and details with unsettling precision. Those watching, especially Detective Claire Hayes, who had just arrived, noticed the contradiction. A grieving husband should unravel. Daniel instead seemed controlled, as though grief itself were measured. Hayes studied him quietly, her instincts sparking. Something about this didn't align. Reporters gathered near the tape, snapping photographs of Daniel's anguish. The headlines were already writing themselves. Perfect marriage shattered. Wife found dead in mysterious circumstances. Daniel barely noticed. He stared at Emily's still form, his mind repeating the same words over and over. She can't be gone. Not like this. But as officers zipped the body bag shut, the illusion of his perfect life followed her into the dark, and Detective Hayes was determined to uncover what truly lay beneath. Detective Claire Hayes stepped under the yellow tape just as the paramedics wheeled Emily's body away. The morning fog clung to the ground, a fitting shroud for a death without clear answers. Hayes was known for her sharp instincts and unrelenting eye for detail. She trusted silences as much as words. Her gaze settled on Daniel. He stood rigid, his suit rumpled, his hands trembling just enough to appear human but not enough to convince her. His grief looked polished, the kind of performance a man might practice in the mirror. She approached him slowly. "Mr. Whitmore?" Daniel turned, eyes glassy. "My wife, she's gone." The words cracked, but the delivery was almost too precise. Hayes tilted her head, listening not just to what he said, but how he said it. "I'm sorry for your loss," she replied. Her tone was calm, steady. "I need to ask you some questions. When did you last see Emily?" Daniel recounted the previous evening, her dinner plans, the unanswered calls, the hours of waiting. He spoke clearly as if rehearsed. Hayes noted every detail, every pause, every shift of his eyes. "And your marriage?" she asked carefully. His jaw tightened. "We were happy. Everyone knew that. We had everything." It was the wrong answer, Hayes thought. Too broad, too defensive. A man truly grieving would reach for personal memories, not a flawless image. She scribbled it down. Later, as she reviewed Emily's belongings collected from the car, small inconsistencies emerged. A half-written note in her purse hinted at discontent. A second cell phone tucked into the glove box suggested a life Daniel hadn't mentioned. Hayes felt the familiar pull of a case that wasn't what it seemed. Emily Whitmore hadn't just vanished into the night. Something had driven her there, and Daniel, with his perfect answers and carefully measured grief, was hiding something, whether guilt, fear, or secrets yet uncovered. As Hayes left the park, the first ripple of suspicion had already taken root. Daniel's perfect life had cracked, and she intended to pry it wide open. And somewhere, hidden in Emily's silence, waited the first thread of truth. Detective Hayes had learned long ago that the truth often hid in the smallest places. Days after Emily's death, she returned to the Whitmore house with a warrant. The pristine home felt like a museum. Photographs of smiling vacations, books lined neatly, everything staged as though to convince the world of harmony. Upstairs, in the corner of Emily's nightstand drawer, Hayes found it, a leather-bound journal, worn at the edges, tucked beneath a stack of romance novels. She slipped on gloves and opened it carefully. The first pages looked ordinary. Lists, notes, casual observations. But as she turned further, the words grew darker, heavier, desperate. Daniel says I'm overreacting. He always makes me question myself. Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a glass cage, smiling while I suffocate. Hayes's pen stilled as she read. This wasn't the portrait of a happy marriage. It was a record of control, subtle, corrosive, deliberate. Emily wrote about how Daniel would dismiss her worries, twist her doubts into weakness, and smooth everything over in public. The world saw charm. Emily felt chains. The entries became more alarming as the months passed. He watches what I spend. He knows where I go. He doesn't yell, he doesn't need to. His silence is worse. Hayes's chest tightened. Psychological control often left no bruises but scarred deeper than any wound. Daniel's mask of perfection was starting to peel away. Then came something stranger. Scattered through the later pages were cryptic notes, single lines written hurriedly, initials underlined in the margins. Meeting J soon, he understands. Another page. If D ever finds out about R, I don't know what he'll do. The initials were inconsistent. J, R, sometimes just question marks circled in ink. A puzzle Emily never finished. Hayes knew it could mean another man, a confidant, or perhaps someone tied to a larger secret. Whatever the truth, Emily clearly feared Daniel discovering it. Hayes closed the journal, her expression unreadable. To the world, Emily Whitmore had been the picture of devotion. But within these pages, she was a woman terrified of the man she married. And someone else, someone unnamed, had drifted into her life before the end. Hayes tucked the journal into an evidence bag. Outside, the sun was setting, shadows stretching long across the street. For Daniel Whitmore, the shadows were just beginning to move. The journal's cryptic initials gnawed at Detective Hayes. Late nights at her desk turned into long hours combing through Emily's phone records and the second cell phone recovered from her car. The device had been wiped of most content, but fragments remained, traces of encrypted messages, a handful of late-night calls, and one unsaved contact identified only by a single letter. J. Hayes leaned back, her pen tapping the desk. Was Emily having an affair, or was she seeking help from someone outside her marriage? The tone of the journal suggested desperation, not passion. Still, the secrecy was undeniable. She brought the evidence to Daniel the next morning. He sat stiffly in the living room, his tie knotted as if prepared for a meeting rather than a conversation about his dead wife. Hayes placed the phone records on the table between them. "Who is Jay?" she asked plainly. Daniel's brows knit together. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Emily called this number almost every night for weeks," Hayes pressed. She also wrote about him in her journal. "You expect me to believe you never noticed?" His jaw tightened. "Emily kept things from me, I'll admit that. But an affair? No, she wouldn't." Hayes studied him. His voice had the calm of a practiced man, but beneath it she heard the faint tremor. His hands fidgeted against the armrest, fingers tapping a restless rhythm. "Or perhaps," Hayes continued, "it wasn't an affair. Perhaps she confided in someone about you." Daniel's composure cracked. His eyes flashed, then dimmed as quickly as they'd lit. "You're twisting this. She was my wife. We had problems, yes, but nothing worth—" He stopped himself, biting down on the words. Hayes leaned forward. "Nothing worth what, Mr. Whitmore?" He didn't answer. The silence between them felt heavier than any confession. Later, alone in her car, Hayes reviewed her notes. The man known only as Jay was more than a shadow. He was a key. Whether a lover, a confidant, or a threat, he had been close to Emily in her final days. For Daniel, the questions were circling tighter, his mask beginning to slip. Hayes could feel it. The image of the perfect husband was collapsing, and with it the life he had so carefully built. And soon, the world beyond the police would notice the cracks. By the end of the week, Crestwood Lane no longer felt like home, but a stage under siege. News vans lined the street, cameras flashing whenever Daniel stepped outside. Headlines screamed from television screens and online feeds. Perfect husband or hidden predator. Emily Whitmore's secret life. Neighbors who once waved warmly now crossed the street to avoid him. At the grocery store, hushed voices trailed in his wake. He doesn't look heartbroken. Too calm. Too clean. The mask he had so carefully worn was no longer enough. Suspicion had stained it beyond repair. At work, Daniel's partners kept their distance. Calls went unanswered, meetings canceled. Clients whispered about reputational risk. His perfect career, the very pillar of his identity, was beginning to collapse under the weight of whispered guilt. Detective Hayes watched it all closely. Public pressure was an ally in cases like this, but she also knew image could not convict a man. She needed more than whispers. She needed proof. Meanwhile, the cracks in Daniel's facade widened in private. Late at night, when the cameras were gone, he stood in front of the mirror replaying Emily's words from her journal, words that gnawed at him. He always makes me question myself. He remembered arguments where he had turned her doubts back on her, convincing her she was too sensitive, too dramatic. Gaslighting had been easy. Controlling her reality had become second nature. Flashbacks pierced through his memory. Emily asking to visit her sister more often. Daniel reminding her how ungrateful she was. Emily wanting to return to work, Daniel insisting his income was enough. He never yelled, never struck her. Instead, he smothered her independence beneath the guise of protection. Outside, he smiled, shook hands, and charmed every room he entered. Inside, Emily's voice had been drowned in silence. Now that silence was echoing louder than ever. Reporters replayed every interview of Daniel's calm composure. "Look at him," they said. Not a tear out of place. Public opinion was turning, and with it the weight of isolation pressed down harder. Friends no longer returned calls. Even Laura, Emily's closest friend, had vanished from his orbit. Daniel poured himself another drink, staring at the empty chair across the table. His wife was gone, his neighbors against him. His empire trembling. And somewhere out there, he knew, someone else was waiting to speak. The media storm reached a new peak when Detective Hayes announced that Emily's best friend, Laura Mitchell, had come forward. Unlike neighbors and colleagues who only speculated, Laura carried memories, late-night phone calls, whispered fears that painted Emily's marriage in chilling colors. They met in Hayes's office, blinds drawn against the swarm of reporters outside. Laura sat stiffly in the chair, fingers twisting a tissue until it tore. Her eyes were rimmed red, but her voice, once she began, was steady. Emily wasn't happy, Detective. She wanted people to believe she was, but she wasn't. Daniel controlled everything, what she wore, where she went, even who she saw. She called me sometimes, in the middle of the night, said she felt like he was watching her, like he didn't need to yell because the silence was worse. Hayes leaned forward, nodding gently. Did she ever say she was afraid for her life? Laura hesitated, then whispered, Yes, she said if she ever tried to leave, he'd ruin her. She didn't say how, but I believed her. Emily wasn't dramatic. If anything, she kept too much inside. The detective's pen scratched quickly across the page. This was more than character testimony. It was the intimate view of a woman suffocating behind closed doors. Laura's hands trembled as she pulled something from her purse, a small envelope. She gave this to me 2 weeks before she died. Told me not to open it unless something happened to her. I couldn't until now. Inside was a single note written in Emily's looping handwriting. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance. Daniel has secrets. Proof is hidden where he'll never think to look. No location. No explanation. Just a cryptic warning, both vague and terrifying. Hayes's pulse quickened. Emily hadn't been imagining things. She had been preparing for something. But where was the proof? Later that evening, as Laura left the station, reporters swarmed her. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. Her words, Emily was afraid of him, spread like wildfire across headlines. Inside his darkened house, Daniel watched the coverage unfold. His glass slipped from his hand, shattering across the floor. Laura's betrayal wasn't just inconvenient. It was dangerous. If Emily had hidden proof, someone would find it. And once they did, everything he had built would collapse beyond repair. Detective Hayes knew Emily's cryptic warning meant something tangible existed. Proof that could tear Daniel's mask apart. She requested a second exhaustive search of Emily's personal belongings. Hours later, A technician called her over. Inside the lining of Emily's handbag, carefully stitched into a seam, was a tiny flash drive. Almost invisible, but deliberately hidden. Hayes slipped on gloves and held it up, the metallic glint catching the harsh light of the evidence room. When she inserted it into her laptop, the files loaded slowly, as though reluctant to reveal their contents. Inside were audio recordings, each one labeled only by date. Hayes pressed play. Emily's voice came first, soft, shaken. "Why are you doing this, Daniel? I can't live like this." Then Daniel's reply, cold, clipped, chilling. "You're not going anywhere. You think you have a life outside of me? You don't. You leave and you'll regret it." Hayes froze. This wasn't speculation or hearsay. It was evidence, raw and undeniable. The next recording shifted tone. Emily must have left the recorder running during one of Daniel's late-night phone calls. His voice lowered, discussing financial accounts, offshore transfers, names of associates. He spoke with the confidence of someone untouchable. Hayes's pen scratched furiously across her notes. Fraud, shell companies, potential cover-ups. Emily had uncovered far more than marital cruelty. She had stumbled onto the foundation of Daniel's career. The empire that made him admired was built on corruption. Another file opened to a chilling conclusion. Emily whispered into the recorder, her voice breaking. "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Daniel has too much to lose. They all do." Hayes leaned back, the weight of the discovery pressing down on her. Emily hadn't been paranoid. She had been documenting her own cage, leaving breadcrumbs for the day someone finally listened. If Emily's death was connected to these recordings, then Daniel wasn't the only one with motive. Powerful names could be entangled in his fraud, people willing to ensure silence at any cost. Still, one truth was clear. Daniel had threatened his wife. Daniel had secrets worth killing for. Hayes ejected the drive and sealed it carefully. This was no longer just a marital tragedy. It was the beginning of a much larger unraveling, and now Daniel Whitmore would have to face the darkness his wife had dragged into the light. The interrogation room was stripped bare. Gray walls, a single table, the hum of a flickering light above. Daniel sat across from Detective Hayes, his suit jacket folded neatly beside him as if appearance could still protect him. His hands were clasped tightly, knuckles white, jaw set in practiced calm. Hayes slid the evidence bag across the table. Inside, the flash drive gleamed like a loaded weapon. "We listened, Daniel," she said evenly. "The threats, the fraud, the offshore accounts. Emily recorded everything." For the first time, his composure wavered. A muscle twitched beneath his eye. She was unstable. You can't take her words at face value. "Then explain your voice," Hayes pressed. She leaned forward, eyes locked on his. "You told her she'd regret leaving. You told her she had no life outside you. That's not instability. That's fear." Daniel's mask cracked. He slammed his palm against the table, startling the officer in the corner. "I never touched her. Do you understand? I didn't kill my wife." His voice thundered, then dropped to a hoarse whisper. "I loved her in my way." "In your way," Hayes echoed, her tone razor-sharp. "Control, silence, gaslighting. That's not love, Mr. Whitmore. That's ownership." He looked away, shoulders heaving. The perfect husband, now reduced to fragments. Yet even as his fury subsided, denial remained stitched into him. "You think I wanted her dead? She was my life. Without her, He cut himself off, swallowing the words like poison. Hayes studied him carefully. His anger was real, his grief twisted but not entirely false. Still, the evidence stacked against him was damning, and yet something unsettled her. Emily's final recording spoke not only of Daniel but of others, shadows connected to his fraud, people with just as much to lose. "Maybe you didn't kill her," Hayes said softly, watching his head snap up. "Maybe you only trapped her in a cage until someone else decided silence was worth more than her life." Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, fear, raw and unmasked, crossed his face. Hayes leaned back, the room heavy with silence. The mask was shattered, but the truth was far from whole. Emily Whitmore's death was no longer just about a husband and wife. It was about the dangerous web she had stumbled into, and the secrets still waiting to be unearthed. Detective Hayes pored over the flash drive for hours, replaying files until the words carved themselves into her thoughts. Fraud, intimidation, silence. Daniel's guilt was undeniable, but something else gnawed at her. Emily's final whispers weren't about a marriage alone. They hinted at something wider, darker. The breakthrough came when Hayes traced the mysterious contact, Jay. Phone records led to a former financial analyst, Jonathan Reed, who had vanished from the industry years earlier after trying to expose corruption inside Daniel's firm. Reed had resurfaced quietly, living under the radar, and Hayes found him reluctant to talk. When she finally cornered him, his eyes darted nervously, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily reached out to me. She wanted help. Said she had documents that could prove everything Daniel built was rotten. Offshore accounts, payoffs, fraud bigger than you can imagine. She wasn't planning to run away. She was planning to take him down. Hayes's chest tightened. Emily hadn't been a victim in silence. She had been preparing for battle, but she'd chosen an ally too dangerous to be ignored. On the night she died, Reed continued, she told me she was ready. She said she was meeting someone, not Daniel, someone else connected to the firm. After that, she never called back. His hands shook. If Daniel didn't kill her, then whoever was protecting those accounts did. The puzzle snapped together like broken glass. Emily had been cornered that night, trapped between a husband desperate to preserve his image and powerful men determined to bury their crimes. Her death was not a simple act of domestic despair, but a collision of betrayal, greed, and silence. Hayes felt the weight of it settle over her. If she pushed further, she wouldn't just be exposing Daniel. She'd be wading into a storm that reached far beyond one marriage. Back at the station, she stared through the interrogation glass at Daniel. He looked hollow now, stripped of bravado, the edges of his life collapsing. Yet Hayes knew he wasn't the only one with blood on his hands. Emily Whitmore had uncovered the truth, and someone, somewhere, had made sure her voice would never reach the world. But Hayes wasn't about to let that silence stand. The headlines came like fire, consuming what little remained of Daniel Whitmore's carefully curated life. Financial empire collapses amid fraud allegations. Wife's death tied to conspiracy. His name, once synonymous with success, was now dragged through every channel, dissected, vilified, and replayed until the world knew him not as a partner, husband, or leader, but as a monster. His firm crumbled within days. Investors fled, clients vanished, and colleagues who once praised his vision erased his number from their phones. Daniel's house, once admired as a beacon of perfection, became a spectacle for cameras capturing its decay. Shutters closed, garden overgrown, the perfect facade rotted in public view. In the courtroom, he sat between his attorneys, his once steady hands trembling. He faced charges for fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction, but the charge that haunted him most, the death of Emily, remained murky. The recordings damned him as a cruel, controlling husband, but no evidence tied him directly to her final moments. Detective Hayes testified with calm precision, laying bare the tapes, the journal, the threats, yet even she admitted under oath, "We cannot say with certainty whether Daniel Whitmore killed his wife, or whether forces tied to his financial crimes silenced her." Daniel stared down at the polished wood of the defense table, knowing either answer condemned him. To the world, he was guilty, if not of murder, then of creating the cage that led Emily to her fate. At night, in his cell, he replayed the same torment, Emily's face, her words, her silence. Did he drive her to that park, to that meeting, to that end? Or had he lost her to men even darker than himself? The truth was buried with her, an eternal question mark carved into his fall. When the gavel struck, Daniel's perfect life was ash. Reputation gone, wealth gone, Emily gone. Detective Hayes watched from the back of the courtroom, her expression unreadable. She knew justice had been served, but only in fragments. The web that ensnared Emily reached further, and some of its architects still walked free. As the doors closed behind Daniel, Hayes whispered to herself, "Perfection always hides blood beneath its surface." And in Emily's silence, that truth had finally been revealed.